if we,
Councilmember Hickman.
Anthony, in that regard, let's just say that we do option one, do nothing, and we collect the funds for the lifestyle center, whatever it's called, the 8.25 million lifestyle center cost, but we don't ever end up, because I kind of see that one not really as a city project, but like a contractual obligation maybe to the developer, that if the developer does something, we have to pay them, and I may be remembering that wrong, and I'm looking at Jeff, but as opposed to the culture facility, which is something that the city has more say over. Yeah, we want to do a culture facility, and we're going to spend that money. We only spend the 8.25 million for the lifestyle center if the developer does something. Okay, so I guess my question is,
there are no
if we do
contractual
nothing,
obligations.
if we do nothing, option one, and we collect that money, and then the developer doesn't end up doing the lifestyle center, so we don't owe him the 8.25 million, how are those funds reapportioned? Like, do they go back proportionally to the ad valorem partners and to the city? What happens to that money that we capture, but we don't end up, or you could say the same for the culture facility, we don't end up doing it, we don't end up spending the money?
It's never been envisioned that money would go back. It's always been envisioned that you would be using them for some authorized project. And if you didn't use it for the lifestyle center, that you use it for some other authorized project, whether it be some other transportation improvements or some enhancements to Legacy Park, but some other authorized project you would envision it would be used for something like that.
Could the money,
But could the
would
money
the law
be,
allow, I mean, could the money be, because to do something else, that would require a change to the project plan, some kind of amendment, I assume, or something. I'm just saying, if we do nothing and we collect these monies and then the lifestyle center deal doesn't happen and we don't have to pay that to the developer, I don't know if there's something in the existing development agreements or project plans or the law that would say, if 70.
what could happen is totally up to council. I'm telling you what has happened in the past is that you use it for some other authorized project. But yeah, you could say, let's return it to both the city, general fund, capital fund, and to the property tax and jurisdictions. That's one thing you could do.
Councilmember Cassidy.
This is at the end of the period.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's,
So on these options 2, 3, and 4 that are sort of restructuring the sales tax piece of this and would result in more funds going to the city's general fund and capital fund, what has been the discussion about what those funds would be spent on? What would be our budgetary plan for the use of those funds? I mean, I'm just cautious to, I don't even know if the statutory committee would support numbers 2, 3, and 4 to do the reapportionment, but looking down the barrel of an upcoming utility vote on stormwater and knowing that one issue that we've heard last go around was that this is, going to be a slush fund for the general fund, or is this something that's really needed? I have concerns that taking action on this in the short term could have a negative impact on the stormwater utility vote, because if we just put $3.6 million into the general fund, seems to me a logical question is going to come up in the community is, why do we need a stormwater utility now? Now,
That was
I mean, I'm
discussed
not saying that may or may
previously.
not be a good thing. I'm just putting that out there as I think it's something we need to be aware of.
That's a very valid point.
And we need to have a plan for what we're going to do with that money. And if we don't have a plan, then maybe it goes to the stormwater and we don't have a utility. I don't know.
Yeah, that was discussed previously, and I
process
can't
may
speak
not
to
just
what
go to
someone
general,
may
right?
think, but I would just draw council's attention back to those mega trends that we talked about. And remember that the general fund does not have a slush fund. The general fund is spending more money than it's taking in each year right now. So I would suggest that the first thing that this new money would do is to get the general fund back to square zero, basically, where you're not drawing down fund balance. You're paying for things that you're currently doing.
I guess my comment,
Now.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Anthony.
Now, if you wanted to add some things, yes, you could. But again, in the long term, where the general fund is right now is that it's declining on an annual basis, and this slows that rate of decline. I would also remind council about the mega trend of the public safety sales tax expenses coming into the general fund. The problem that the general fund has now is going to be worse in the future when the general fund takes over the expenses of the public safety sales tax, which does not cover its expenses. We need to improve the status of the general fund, and this is one step towards doing that. We've talked about this before, but I would just remind council those things.
And I understand everything you're saying, Anthony. I'm just saying to the average voter, it needs to be, we need to have this coupled if we do options 2, 3, or 4, in my opinion, coupled with the executive memo, the talking points, whatever it is, because if the article and the transcript is council reapportions an influx of $3.6 million in the general fund, and then we ask the public next fall or next spring for $4 million for a utility, we need to be out in front of that message, and we need to have be prepared to answer the question of what the $3.6 million is going to be spent on, what it's going to be used for, and therefore to lay the foundation for why we still need a stormwater utility. Or I think that we're not helping ourselves necessarily, and I think we all agree that the stormwater utility is important.
Let me say something first to that, because that is our job as city council. That is our job, to make sure that we are educating the public about our financial status. And the fact that, and that's why almost every meeting that I go to, I say to people, we can't do one or the other. We have to do both of these things. We either have to change the TIF, end the TIF, expand the TIF. We have to do something with the TIF, and we have to do something with stormwater. It's been that way ever since I've been on council. We have not done our job of educating folks, the residents. This is not rocket science. The fact is, if you look at what our general fund balance is doing every single year, we're not keeping up with inflation. We cannot add one single more person to our staff, and we all know we need more people on our staff. We cannot add one more person, and our personnel costs are going to go up 15%, 20%.
That's the problem with the public safety sales tax. Yeah.
And that's the problem with the public safety sales tax, because almost all of our big expenses are employees. And so we need to do something with this, and we need to do the stormwater, because stormwater costs are also going up. I remember Mac asking this question in one of the meetings we had about stormwater before we started the open houses, and I just think that that's what our job is, to get out there and explain. And you're absolutely right. We need good talking points. Councilmember Wilson, I'm sorry. All right, Councilmember Hickman.
I don't want to belabor this point, but it's kind of like the stormwater committee is going through a lot in detail of what the money that is going to be raised is going to be spent on, and Sean and his team have come up with what those dollars are going to represent, because we learned from that vote that people wanted to know. I just think that if we're going to do options 2, 3, or 4, which is going to put more money back into the general fund through a reallocation of some sort, we need to be prepared to say, what are we going to do with those extra dollars? Right now, if we do the reserve policy change that the Finance Committee also talked about, and changes those percentages, it's only about $750,000, 700,000 or so, that the budget is technically upside down, but that's only really in part because those are monies that are pre-authorized for the manager to spend. In the event of emergencies, they're not things that we need money, we're not technically drawing down on the fund balance unless we go over budget or we have an emergency. So, in theory, $3.6 million is, one could say, new dollars to spend on new services or expanding services or hiring personnel that maybe need to be hired. my point is this, is that people in this room know a lot more than the average person that goes out there and vote. And us 9 members of council who are volunteers and elected can't educate the thousands of people who vote in the community. I mean, that's not realistic in my opinion. And so, you know, I think that it needs to be whatever, if we do 2, 3, or 4, we need to have, and I'd like to have a list. You know, we've got 14 unfunded positions. I think last time I asked the city manager, maybe that was from last fiscal year, and those were about $1 million a year to fund those positions. Not saying that's what we should do, but I think we need to look at it from that perspective. You know, if we're going to do something like this and $3.6 million goes back to that, I've made the comment to people, and something I think is worth looking at is maybe we allocate a percentage of those funds that go to a Norman Economic Development Authority so that we can have an entity that we can then utilize to do economic development things across our community and try to bring quality jobs here. I just worry that if all that money gets dumped into the general fund, it A, affects stormwater utility, and B, it gets lost in the general fund, and, you know, versus if there are things that, you know, and this transportation issue.
I agreed with you initially.
Well, that's just my concern about going forward with 2, 3, or 4 right now,
Right,
is we don't have a plan.
I know, but we have a number of things we know that we need. All I said was, I believe that it wouldn't take us that long to sit down and list, line by line by line by line, exactly what we need to do, and we need to have that discussion in Finance Committee. We need to have it with the whole council. What things, if we free up $3.6 million, what are the things you absolutely want to see in there? Is that part of our solution to the $164,000 for card access? No, I don't know, but I agree. Yes.
One thing I would point out is if you'll pull up the Finance Committee meeting from last August, agenda item number 1, there's a list in there of $2.4 million of cuts that are proposed to balance this year's budget. You want to know where the money's going to go? You do not cut these things. We have a list. It's right there. This is what we would not do.
We don't have $2.4 million of things that need to cut, though.
That's the things that would be recommended to cut in order to meet this year's budget. Just for $2.4 million in the hole.
How are we $2.4 million in the hole?
We budgeted. We budgeted $2.4 million loss.
Well, but 1.8 million of that, 1.4 million of that was the emergency funds that would be necessary only if there was an emergency.
Councilman, I'm telling you, these are the estimated reductions of, you wanted a list, the manager's given us a list of, these are the potential areas that we could cut.
Well, those are potential things that might have to be cut. That doesn't mean that that's where we're going to spend money on. It's a budget.
You asked for a list of items.
Councilmember Scott.
Okay, so we're only on option 2.
But,
I don't know how changing it from whatever it is now to 10% or 0% is any different if it's talking about changing the deal. I mean, that's why.
It is, but
you're the one. I mean,
but going to 0 is totally different. Not putting anything in.
Well, still changing the deal. Not changing the deal is
leaving
leaving it as is, option 1, and letting it fully fund in 2.5 years, and then the Norman Public Schools multiplier protection thing goes away. I mean, so if you're talking about protecting the schools, you're really talking about 2.5 years till December 2020. You know, I mean, if we're going to do a reapportionment, I'm certainly not opposed to making it 0, because in part, to me, we would be doing that for the benefit of the taxing partners as opposed to ending it early, because you know, I think that the community would prefer to see us end the TIF early.
I just don't want to make the decision for those other taxing jurisdictions. If they want to remain in that TIF, then their elected bodies should make a decision or not. But if we decide we want to get out,
I'm not sure they can do
well,
that.
they could say, okay, our board decided, council, we want you to take us out. You know, that type of thing. But if they wanted to stay in,
We recommend. I mean, we
want you to stay in.
Yeah, we know from the resolution we sent to them about the culture facility on the senior center, they can send back to us whatever recommendation they want. I mean, they've done in the past.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter really what we saying and what we send to them. They're going to send back to us whatever they want.
That's true.
Because that's, you know, at least my experience the time I've been on council. So in a way, we've spent a lot of time talking about these 10 options, and I'm not sure how much it totally matters what we end up saying and sending to them, because they're going to send back to us whatever they choose to send back to us. And
But
so,
we can override what they do. But the idea is to try to work together with them to get something that is appealing. I mean, I've had loose discussions with them conceptually about this, 5, 10, 50%, just the idea of if we cut back our sales tax portion, what do you think about that? Of course, Norman Public Schools is, we need some time. Don't pull the rug out from under us in a year. If you're gonna do this, give us 2 or 3 years, give us a runway so we can budget, Ideally, they'd like a little more time to come in there. Of course, they're about like, well, we want to see the area developed. We went from 0 property taxes on raw land. We want to see it developed. That's why we got into it in the first place, was to see it fully developed. If it's not going to fully develop, then we'd like to see it develop as much as possible to get maybe some of these bigger deals done. That's what they're looking at is, the ad valorem part of it too.
There are some real advantages in the sense that we could go ahead and do something to help our general fund in the next few months. That is a real advantage. There's the advantage, like Councilmember Caspary has said, about the school system. It helps the school system. There is an advantage in not getting into a protracted contractual discussion with the developers on the lifestyle center. Not that we couldn't work on that, because we could, but that will take some time. So it seems like the advantages, we can still make a decision about the cultural center money. It seems like the advantages of us at least keeping the TIF open for a few more years, there's quite a few advantages to that and not a whole lot of disadvantages to it. Because at any time we could say, okay, these guys, we're never going to get a lifestyle. That's never going to happen. So let's end it. And we may want to be having those discussions with them. But I just see there's some advantages to this.
Option 9, you've already discussed. This is basically using the cultural center project authorization for the senior center in the UNP project area. Now remember, option 9 and option 10 were not actually discussed at the finance committee, but these are options that remain on the table because there's things that you've already talked about. You've already passed a resolution related to this one. You passed a resolution. This was council's recommendation. The statutory review committee came back with their recommendation. They didn't like what council said, but you could still do it, okay? You could vote to override what the statutory review committee recommended. You'd basically be using that $8.75 million for a senior center in the project area and everything else remaining in place, which is not a given, but that's what's assumed here. Everything else remaining in place, we'd be back to about 2.5 years to fully fund all the authorized projects. Don't believe we'd have to issue any debt because with the money that we have on hand and the apportionment rate that we have right now, it's going to take some time to build that senior center. So we'd be collecting enough money to do it on a pay-as-you-go basis.
So could we lower the tax and do the senior center?
That's one thing you could do. Basically, that would be you'd be combining option 2 through 4 with option 9.
You're asking more from the taxing
It would extend the
jurisdiction
life
when
of the
you do
TIF.
that, because they're losing the capability of using that money for something that would be an investment that would grow the amount of taxes.
Well,
that
they'd
they
still
would-
have the revenue to borrow. They'd still be able to
Are you talking about the
issue
multiplier
debt,
effect?
right? Like if they needed a lifestyle center came along after we lowered the
Under
taxes,
this proposal, the lifestyle center project would still be in place.
so they could still, even though it's a slower rate of revenue, they could still borrow money. We still borrow money to build this fabulous lifestyle
So
center.
keep in mind, if
And
there's
hubs, you know.
a cultural facility or something like that, that will be something that pays, if it's in the increment area, it will be paying ad valorem tax. If it's in the project area, it will not.
So they're not getting
So
anything from it.
they don't have any desire to build anything that's not in the increment area. So
I understand that, but I think it behooves us all,
But if we can
as
put a senior
Cleveland
center-
County and as City of Norman, to have a robust senior center.
But we could do a senior, like that's option 10, we could do a senior center instead of a lifestyle center, and still keep the lifestyle center, or take the lifestyle center out and put the senior center in there,
As long as it's in
Cultural?
as long as it's in the project area.
on 24th Avenue.
Anyway,
Yeah.
what they said is, they don't think a senior center qualifies as a cultural center, and I have to agree, there's nothing that's gonna generate outside tech for senior center. So, let's not call a senior center a cultural center, let's just call it a senior center and add a project. In fact, their recommendation was, add a project. They didn't have any problem with adding a project.
I know, and then they said, let's go put a thing over on the fairgrounds. It didn't make any sense.
That was part of the original arena TIF deal, so that's off the table. So now we're
Also
kinda
not
back
in
to-
the increment area.
Yeah.
That was just thrown out there by one person on the statutory committee.
No, they-
No decision.
It's what it came
Yet
back
it landed
to
into
us.
the
They
plan.
asked the council to look at it, to consider.
Come on, Mac, you're giving
Yeah,
up too
don't you
early.
want to see what we choose to do?
Come on.
All right, guys.
You've got no staying power, no
Guys,
staying power.
Okay,
You
let's,
got Newborn at home something?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Being called away.
Yeah.
Good luck.
the weather is getting bad, so let's try to wind this up. Councilmember Hickman and then Holman.
I guess I go back to, I'm not sure why this is something we need to, it's early September and this is on our agenda. There are still a lot of issues to me that need to be figured out. I've already talked about what we do with the 3.6 million number, do an allocation. And I'll just say that these options here involving the senior center are very important to me, but I'm still holding my breath and praying that we get the Griffin Park lease done and we get the thing worked out with the Department of Mental Health,
Agreed.
and we can use those funds to build the senior center.
Agreed.
If that happens, then my opinion about some of these options might change, because I may be more willing to say, let's take the cultural center out as a project and let the thing fully fund itself
Yeah.
in a year and work with the Norman Public Schools to give them a little more of a runway. Because I think if we want to talk about the schools and protecting the schools, there are things we could do that provide the school with more flexibility financially than they have right now with the TIF funds. Because my understanding is the TIF funds are like building funds, land funds, that they're not allowed to pay teachers with. They can't use those funds to pay payroll, salaries. Versus if we did things like, excuse me?
No, I
that's not
don't think that's
accurate.
right.
That's accurate at all.
Well, that's what they've told me.
Dr. Migliorino said that pays for their SRO program.
Well, but that's not a teacher. I said they can't use the funds to pay for teachers, staffing costs.
Well, if they,
Now, maybe they use it for the SRO, I don't know. My point just is there are other things that we could do as a city, which I'm sure Ken's gonna love hearing this idea, but I assume they pay for water and maybe other city services. There are things, for example, that we could do to not charge them maybe for those kinds of services that would be relieved to their general fund, like our general fund, which could then be funds spent on salaries. Or I'm just saying there are other things that we could do to give them a runway and give them some financial protection so that we aren't giving them quote a budget cut in the 2.5 years that are left for this thing
Okay,
to fully
but
fund.
just let me,
So I would kind of like maybe to revisit this conversation in, 60 days or something, to see what happens with the Department of Mental Health, to see what happens with this site selection person, because what I also hear Jeff saying is, if these people come to town and say, yeah, they want to do this, then we may be getting a call from the developer saying, I need my $8 million.
we got
At the same time, I know we have that, Robert, but we don't have the other $8 million that if, for example, the Department of Mental Health says, nope, we're not doing that lease deal, then I think the majority of us on council say we want to tap that $8.75 million and build a senior center. We don't have those sets of funds, and if we've already then sent the reapportionment discussion on to the statutory committee, we've kind of, the boat's left the dock, and now we're looking at ourselves saying, gosh, wish you would, maybe we don't want to cut that money, because maybe now we want to get the $8.75 million, and we need the $8 million, and we need that money now, or more quickly, and maybe we can finance it, I don't know, maybe it's just going to cost us more money. And so there's still some things up in the air that in my mind relate to what I would feel more comfortable doing, and I guess I'm just unsure of, if we're not gonna end it, which is I think what a lot of people in the community want, why this is urgent to move forward with today.
I think it was part of our discussion for finance because of, one, the change in the reserve policy that added some money back into our bottom line. And this was a second part of, here's something else we could do almost immediately to help our general fund through this year and next year when we really need that help. So
And all
I
the
think
signs said, in the TIF, balance the budget. Balance the budget.
Well,
This balances the budget.
It does it in the TIF though. I mean, there are two important parts of
I
that.
think one is no arena,
Conversation.
no arena, in the TIF, so no arena, there is no arena. The arena, the TIF is basically frozen. You're gonna meet your current obligations, so you're ending it by the portion that's going in, you got a plan to end it. And so that's why,
We are in.
Well, if we don't do something, then we do option one, which is do nothing.
right now, we're doing option one. That's our current path right now.
So instead,
So
I
this-
think we should move forward with a different option.
There's $300,000 a month going into this fund that's not going to the general fund.
that we could be
The 250 or
using.
200, that, you know.
I think Councilmember Holman has been waiting.
I mean, I agree about maybe coming back to this, because I think we'll know a whole lot more about some stuff in just a month or less or two. We'll know more about the land at the North Base area. We'll know about the Griffin land, and so I think we have a lot more better idea about what we want to do if we come back in just a month or two, even so.
I mean, could we still do that?
I would agree with the month. What,
Could we still, I mean, potentially move forward today with another option and then also revisit the cultural center / senior center when we know more about Griffin? I mean, does it,
We need a proposal to take to the statutory review committee.
okay.
Doesn't mean we can't bring multiple ones to them. I mean, ideally, we would like to take one for them to consider and talk about and then get back to us. Whenever we do go to the statutory review
I-
committee, that could be.
I think that we'll know some, I'm hoping that we're gonna know some things within the next month and about land. And so I do think there may be some things that we could be looking at now. Maybe not, maybe that's the next step that we have to have, is to send it on to the statutory review committee. But if we wait a few more weeks, we may know by the end of September and can bring it back.
And we also have the OU Regents
That-
consideration of the land swap bill, so I mean, in addition to
That's what I was
the mental health thing,
That's,
yeah.
that's what I'm talking
Oh,
about.
okay.
I'm
Yeah,
saying
that's what I was
in
talking about, too.
September, we
We'll know
have
all
the
about it.
possibilities of
If
several
they say no,
different
then we,
dominoes falling that will help us know more, was the Norman Forward.
so I'm for not
option
adding
if
more
we
and
get the-
ending it in
land lease.
2.5 years. I mean,
Can we ask, Jeff, do we have any idea of or whoever's handling it, the Department of Mental Health lease discussions, do we have any idea of kind of where you think that stands and when we might know if that's gonna happen?
I-
The mayor probably knows more. I think she had a more recent
I
discussion.
talked
Oh,
to,
okay, I'm sorry.
I had a conference call with Terry Hoffman, just absolutely today. So I need to go back and talk to Catherine. I did send a memo about that. So I need to go talk to Catherine, but I'm hoping that it was very positive conversation, so.
Do we think in,
Let me find out
Next
a little
30 days
bit more.
that we
I'm
may-
hoping
okay.
this month. I hate to say that in public, and I'm glad Mac's gone and everybody's RSU.
Nobody reads paper.
Yeah, there's nobody here that would tell
So
anything.
we don't want to jinx anything here. Anyway, so.
Finally, option 10 is
last comment I have is, a lot of the feedback that I got on the cultural facility issue was, if we don't even know what it is, why are we collecting the money to fund it? And I think for some of us, the senior center process, you know, kind of validated that, you know, why collect $8 million if we really don't have control over it? I guess in a way we do. We could override the statutory committee, but then that's stepping on people's toes. I guess the other comment that I would make would be, if we can take 30 or 60 days and revisit this, maybe during that window of time, what I think would be helpful would be, I think this was even discussed with the statutory committee, but I don't remember that for sure. If we could talk to, like, I see Scott at the chamber, or visit Norman, or other community partners, and let's have a town hall, or let's have some kind of a discussion about, you know, if the culture facility is not the senior center, let's assume those other chips fall into place, what do we think that money would be used for, so that if we, as we're making a decision about, because if we slow down the collection of the funds, you know, that may or may not impact how quickly we could build whatever this culture facility is, or whether or not we want to keep it as a project, or take it out as a project. And it's just, I struggle with the idea of what could that be realistically. I mean, I've heard the rumors, and I know that in, I think, 2012 there were minutes from a public meeting, and now it's 6 years later. Maybe it's time to have a kind of a follow-up discussion of what could that look like, and maybe get the county, you know, get some of those folks involved. And if we push this off for 30, 60 days, maybe that's a window of time to have that conversation. I think that would be helpful to me, as opposed to just saying we're going to keep the project in place, even though the statutory committee rejected it as a senior center, but we have no idea what it's going to be. I mean, some of the feedback I've heard from the communities that they have concerns
Yeah,
about that.
and I absolutely understand that. We've gone a long time. It's the same thing for the lifestyle center. If we don't know what it is now, then when are we gonna know what it is?
Well,
So
but that's
I-
pretty well defined though
We
in the
got
agreements. We
qualifications.
know what that is, the
We know
qualifications
what
for
lifestyle
that.
center is too, it's in the development agreement, we've already outlined what it is.
We-
We haven't had a proposal come
We
forward.
have, but we still don't have a proposal for it, and we know that the original thing that was proposed, they're not developing those much anymore.
no, I understand.
That's all
Yeah.
I'm saying. It's the same thing,
Just
and I
remember that
understand
when we
that-
started collecting these funds in 2006, we didn't know what any of these things would be. And council authorized all of these projects without the blanks having been filled in. We didn't know what Legacy Park would be. We didn't know what the configuration of the I-35 and Robinson interchange would be. We didn't know any of these things. So, you know, there was no contemplation
Well,
of
that
how
was,
they go.
that was changed in the middle of the stream, so.
Best thing
Okay.
about the whole thing.
Suggestion.
All right. Any final comments, because I'm gonna close this meeting out.
Yeah,
Mr. Bryan.
I just want to make one comment on the cultural facility and the land donation. The development agreement actually does have a deadline in that, it's 2026.
Right.
So, you know, if it's something you want to work on to get that defined, just have that in the back of your head, that 2026 is the deadline.
Botanical gardens.
Yes.
Botanical gardens.
Botanical garden.
Yes.
So do I hear basically
Look exactly like
the
the Marion
the
Botanical
council's direction right now is option
Crystal
one
Ridge.
for now? Do nothing for now?
For a little bit.
So option one.
For now.
We're not ready to
It
make a
ends in
decision on
2.5
the other
years of
options
option
yet.
one. Right.
So,
We're ending
yeah,
it.
that is correct.
But
By doing nothing.
we'll revisit it in 60 days.
There's some good options in there. I think
With,
we
with,
could-
within a 60-day
May free.
period, we'll,
You guys
so
remember
it
that?
could be sooner.
Yes.
If we have other information, we will, but within 60 days, we'll revisit it. So,
No.
all right, thank you all
Debating
very
about
much.
going
Do
to
I have a motion to
Othello's
adjourn?
or
To adjourn. Second.
Second.
Othello.